on, you bastard!
When you really think about it, toy lines have a lot of shit they need to focus on at any given time. Budgets, marketing, media synchronicity, ensuring Sure Shot gets pushed back another 5 years. It's all stuff that needs to be taken into account. Toy lines aren't just toy lines, they're also the incredible amount of work that goes into them. One factor that many folks forget is longevity. You need to make sure that something has enough of a splash to convince retailers is a new form of product, but also make it generalized enough so the line can ensure longevity. Honestly, kudos to both Studio Series and the Unification era side of Chug. Although the latter goes through name changes time and time again, both have remained solid for the better part of a decade. While focuses shift and gimmicks come and go, you can still put a Siege figure next to one from Age of the Primes and it'll still largely work. That's a testament to the consistency of the design team. However, that longevity also needs to be applied to sublines as well, and Core Class, well, I think it can very much be considered its own subline. Since it's a completely separate scale and style to the rest of the figures, it requires its own attention and focus on sales sustainability. 2 years into the legendary return, it was important to mix things up. A refresh of ideas was required. Collectors and stores alike needed a new reason to care about small scale. With that said, what a toy line needs on a macro scale and what a toy itself needs on a micro scale can sometimes be at odds with each other. It's not often the case, but sometimes an idea is the only way something will ever get done, yet fundamentally be at odds with what the price point is capable of. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to the Legacy Dinobots and their combined mode, Volcanicus. On paper, Legends Dinobots seem like a pretty safe bet for the core class lineup. I mean, the Dinobots are mega popular even amongst the general public. Robot dinosaurs? Who doesn't want those? Why do you think Hasbro keeps redoing the dino stuff across their Power Rangers oh no. There's also the ease of collectability. Small scale figures push you to grab a bunch of them, it's just the way the brain functions. Coupled with the fact that your other options are either an awesome but super expensive shelf-hogging beefcake team, or why did they reissue these again? Which actually brings up the next point. The Volcanicus concept had never really been done properly in toy form. The figures were deeply disappointing and the fiction had always been a bit shit. But the desire was always still there. Ever since G1, fans have been clamoring for a combined version. All of these lads combine, why not these ones? And with the possibility of being better than the original Pop Pie version, there was potential hype for these. It seemed like a great way to smash out several concepts in one, as well as backdoor some other figures in there later. So everyone waited with bated breath, ready to start the team. The line commenced, the cores dropped, and it was off to an okay start. Some of the figures were received quite well, while others not so much. I suppose release order is a good place to start as any, so first up, we were smashed with Sloog. You may or may not remember from the Legacy video that dropped a while ago, but I am not calling him Slug because that sounds dumb, and the other word is a slur in several parts of the world, so I'm just going to annoy my audience by saying whatever the f*** I want. Nobody will be happy, comments will soar, and I'll be able to farm the revenue twice over. Sloog has a pretty good Triceratops mode, but I feel there are elements that do feel like they could be better. The skull work is pretty damn good though, which is basically what carries it. Continuing the Kingdom tradition of drawing inspiration from larger size classes, the Legacy Dinobots draw a lot of their sculpt inspiration from the SS86 versions. The block detail on the top, the guns on the side, and even the legs mimicking the way the leader class does theirs for necessitating folding in, it's all dead ringers for it. It's not exactly a shrunken down version, but there's enough DNA here to get the point across. Of course, whether the detail is derivative or original, it's all very crisp and lovely. Draped across this delightful shade of silver, missing the Games Workshop quality pretty comfortably, it feels constructed, and gives the illusion of being much bigger than it is. I always prefer this style of Legends mechanical detail, the style that invokes a smaller scale, rather than a smaller figure in a larger scale. It's just more pleasing to me. The biggest attractor for it is honestly the lack of paint, simply due to how this works. Instead of casting sliding Slinger in multiple shades, everything is done in silver. It's a lovely silver, but that forces all the paint to be allocated to very specific areas. The Dino mode is very much not the main focus of the deco here. The vast majority of the paint is saved for the Combiner kibble stored in his tail and the robot torso coated entirely in red. Sure, you do also get the head and the blocks at the top, but that's essentially the feet for the robot mode, and the torso for combined modes. They didn't even bother painting the horns, though that is sorta close to 86 accurate, which itself is animation accurate. So although I'm annoyed, it's more of a me thing. It's not exactly dedicating anything to just this mode. It's clear throughout the set that the dinosaur modes have been heavily compromised, which might be unfathomable to some. There's the whole debate on whether the dinosaurs or the robots are the Dinobots' primary modes, identity, sound effects, frequency, and all sorts of other factors tie into the argument surrounding this. For Hasbro, however, it's clear they made a lot of sacrifices sacrifices here, even if it does feel like these are the most solid modes overall. And to be fair, it's the only thing I really take major issue with. Sure, the articulation isn't particularly great, but it's not particularly great on the 86 versions either, so big whoop. Plus, well, you know. And sure, the mouth opening is a bit derpy, but he is a combiner, so it makes sense, and again, you know the point. Slaw Salad isn't the best tricycle rider on the market, but when you take into account the posability of other core class beasties, it's far from difficult to justify the choices made. Sludge is a little more difficult with that though, not impossible, but this is where people started getting more critical. It's not too controversial to say that pelvises are the hardest combiner elements to do, is it? If you're not using any major combiner kibble, you're basically making a guy split in half, compared to essentially a cube, a rectangular prism, and a stretchy wetchy. As a result, Sludge basically becomes a brick. The hand and the top section of the body are reasonably well-rounded. The silver paint sadly doesn't continue all over, but it's far from the most hateful instance I've seen of this patchwork. The detail remains quite lovely, with rivets and lines and spikes all over, and the gold on show looks just as crisp as it has before. Awesome head sculpt too, even if it's pretty hollow from the underside. And sure, the hinges that hold the neck in place are pretty egregious, but well, you know. For all the faults, at least the best parts are front and center, drawing your attention. With that said though, the issues still can't be ignored, even if they're not located in the focal point. Arguably, the proportions are where he suffers the most, with massive chonky back legs and practically non-existent front ones. This does make sense considering how the thighs work, but it's still a massive dumpy compared to the chode of a tail. It's really not helped by the massive gap in the middle. It's pretty bad. Something like this doesn't damn the figure. You've seen me review toys that have this issue and still come out really cool, but by the same token, come on, you can do better than this. He's also really hollow towards the back, which, sure, it's the back and not really noticed, but it's still annoying when juxtaposed against the tiny tail. I think a lot of my issues could have been overlooked if that tail was a lot longer, to be honest. Look, out of the Dino mode, Sludge is obviously the weakest. I mean, he doesn't even have any articulation at all. That's a smidge concerning, but considering it's a design that was never meant to combine, being ham-fisted into a combining concept with an alt mode that doesn't line up, nor works as a pelvis, yeah, there's gonna be compromises, especially at the core class price brackets, let alone the sizing. I'm gonna be real, given everything it has to do, I don't hate this. Besides, it still remains a pretty fun desk toy. There's an argument of whether this should have been the way he, and by extension the rest of the Dinobots, should have been done, but for all his faults, in this mode, he's fine. Maybe part of that comes down to character recognition. I mean, I don't particularly vibe with Sludge as a character that much, especially after the disappointment that was the Studio Series version. Grimlock, on the other hand, is a lot better on paper, but in dinosaur mode, I kind of find it less fun. Categorically, it's better constructed with far more realized proportions, better articulation, and no hollow bits, but at the same time, I see the giant legs on the back, and I just can't help but be reminded of the old Volcanicus with its abysmal Grimlock that everyone kept clinging to because it was the only one out there, or SS86 is expensive. That's legitimately the only issue this figure has. Yes, the legs are a bit egregious, even with the thighs down the bottom, and yes, there are exposed ball sockets, but like $20 Legends figure that combines. What the f are you gonna do? I should be able to reconcile that with my own emotions, but instead I just find myself annoyed at how clunky it is. Maybe it's because he's pretty minimalist in the paint department. Unlike Sludge, he lacks the silver paint to really bring certain parts of the alt mode to life. And he also doesn't have the sleekness of Slanderous to fix anything else. You do have some slight spray on the arms and tail, but it's so minimalist that you don't really notice it. And sure, there's gold paint on show, but it's barely anything. Just the toes and neck. By the time you get to the red on the robot shins, he's basically naked. It really makes things like the exposed hinges and hollowness of the back look more out of place than they should. Functionally, given the price range, it should be acceptable, yet I find myself kinda turned off by it. Oh well, at least the articulation is back, even if it's just the legs. Kinda nice though, said legs are very loose, so getting him into any dynamic poses is a smidge difficult. An easy fix, but I don't think you should have to do that. Following the most well-known Dinobot, it's some random guy? Yes, this set offers us 6 Dinobots instead of 5, and it kinda sheds light on why they made this set in the first place. See, when these figures were being conceptualized, from what I understand, Hasbro wanted to have a Dinobot combiner of sorts, as well as a combiner at Legend scale. This proved somewhat difficult. From experience, we know that having the same price point for a singular torso as the limbs never goes well. Furthermore, Volcanicus has always run into problems working with its torso, so basing it on the shitty Power the Primes version, yeah, nah, that doesn't sound like a good idea. So, what do we do here? Well, why not take inspiration from a much older dinosaur-themed combiner, one that's sorely in need of an upgrade. 1989 saw the release of a monstrous Pretender-themed combiner, featuring 6 monster-themed Pretender robots that fit into shells that command the presence of Michael Jackson's Thriller. Problem is, the inner robots were heavily overlooked. Half of them had gold plastic syndrome, and as far as I know, Monstructor never showed up in any shows, so nobody cared. Shortly after, however, the inner robots were redecoed and repainted packaged with dinosaur-themed shells for a Japan-only release, known much more prominently as Dino King. And while this also suffered from gold plastic syndrome and scale nonsense, he did actually appear in some prolific media, facing Star Saber semi-frequently in the Victory anime. So in a similar manner to Skybite eclipsing Cybershark, Dino King cemented himself as the de facto G1 monster combiner that curried the weeb favor. And since it was originally a very small combiner, why not use this opportunity to update him? So this is basically why this exists in the way it does. They use the existing Dinobots as a backdoor for the Dino Force later on, and make the final member basically an avatar for Gairyu. Ironically, we'd eventually get a Monstructor from Dino King, the other way around. This whole set is, in essence, a mismatch of 86-themed Dinobot designs and a combined mode that works as an easy redeco for Dino King. And I'm somewhat conflicted about the whole thing. But my thoughts on that don't particularly come into view until the combined mode, when you can put everything into retrospect. So for now, we get Scarr, a pre-tool of Gairyu that channels a lot of the Power Core Combiner drone from a while back. Lovely to get this dinosaur in a transformable form at least. I've always loved the foot drone from the Brimstone Combiner we got back in the Power Core series. And in terms of the way it looks pretty good, I guess. It's very much a brick with protrusions, but given the combination aspect later, that's not something I'm too frustrated about. Head sculpt is quite adorable. Textbook Gairyu, but through a nice Dinobot filter with the crisp gold. It genuinely feels like the long-lost cousin of Snarl with how pointy it is, and it breaks up the blockiness quite well. The feet aren't really much, and offer very little in the way of posing, but the top section goes really hard. They focus nearly all of their silver budget on the top here, and with the gold meant for the robot mode, it makes him feel way more well-rounded than he would have otherwise. They also make pretty decent use of the combiner kibble, using it as a combiner fist. Functionality issues aside, it's really nicely sculpted. My only real gripe with this, and with the design overall, is how it's painted entirely in black instead of castanet. I get the feeling that the sprue count was pretty low for this figure, something common for these sorts of designs, but still a smidge annoying. It just leads to chipping galore, and it didn't need to. They could have saved the paint applications for the other parts otherwise, but ah well. Still pretty nifty dinosaur and fits with the team pretty damn well. It's really simple, but since it's not trying to be a triple homage, it's able to be. It easily gets the most leeway because it's building something new from the ground up, and it's making rather good use of it. And that completes the Dinobots. Yep, that's it, if you lived in Australia. These are the only Dinobots we got, for whatever reason. See, while y'all might complain now and say we get everything early and we don't deserve it, this is only what happens half the time. The other half, whichever in turn is currently working at Hasbro Australia, just gives up and skips certain ones. I even recall other representatives being baffled by the decision to skip Swoop and Snarl, because, in their words, the Dinobots always sell. Probably can be attributed to the lacking sales of Core Class in retrospect, but whatever. These two ended up being imported, one from Big Bad Toy Store, one from a trip to TF Nation. Would love to go back, but I'm not sure I feel safe traveling there at the moment. Still, at least I was able to pick the not dinosaur up while I was there, and he's decent. He's basically what you would expect from this sort of design at the $20 price range. There's really not much you'd expect them to do beyond this. It's basically just a block with wings, missing the torso crunch we've come to expect from other versions, and that's totally fine. The arms are pretty blatant, and the legs even more so with how the feet stick out. But you don't tend to be that frustrated when most of your attention is drawn to the wings instead. Perhaps they could be a bit bigger, but they are reasonably sculpted and articulated in two separate spots, leading to some reasonable dynamicism. They feel a lot more prominent too, with the use of fists split in half, becoming guns that are in fact blast effect compatible. It's always a coin toss whether you get that functionality these days, so seeing it here is really nice. And on the topic of functionality, you can even use the fists as stand ports. Another feature that's often left out, but not as often as blast effects. Lovely to see nonetheless. But beyond that, and beyond some red from the robot mode, there's not really a lot to this aside from the head. The head is okay, the eyes are kind of ridiculously big and the jaw isn't very pronounced. Furthermore, it's quite hollow at the top due to how this transforms. While I'm not sure of any better solutions, it is pretty noticeable. But hey, otherwise it's a fine figure. It makes a lot of compromises to simplify the design, and aside from figures that don't have source material to draw from, he takes the least amount of inspiration from his SS86 counterparts. Likely because the figure wasn't properly designed at that time anyway. But he does the job pretty okay, and that's enough considering this is only one of 3 modes. And that leads us to a surprisingly brilliant closer. Snarl takes us back to the 86 inspiration, going the furthest to recreate all the fancy steps. The head, the spikes, even the indents in the side where the panels would usually fold out. It's all there and it's all lovely. The paint and color breakup are also the most extensive out of any figure of this set. Dedicated red on the back, silver on the torso with gold plastic shining through. Not that gold plastic. The gold looks pretty nice too, feels a lot less tacky than other cases in the Legacy line. The profile is clean as a whistle, making great use of existing limb pieces. Personally, I'd have much preferred a higher angle so that he doesn't look like he's face planting into the ground, but this is still a very good silhouette. I don't even mind the gap in the middle, normally that would bug me to no end, but this shit is actually doing quite amazingly all things considered. considered. They even picked out the eyes properly with some nice turquoise. Could be brighter, but it's still quite lovely. Hey, at least the Autobot symbol isn't misaligned like many copies of the 86 version were. I don't know what happened between this and the others, but they really hit their stride with the last release. Not to say the others were bad, but this is just on a whole other level. Fortunately, even with Snarl being a massive step above, they still work pretty damn well as a team together. Grimlock stands above the rest, denoting him as the leader even if he doesn't have the paint to match, and the others make a pretty nice dinosaur armada, even those that weren't originally a part of it. As the set goes on, they definitely improve a lot of the paintwork, but even at the start it does pretty well, even if a lot of the articulation is non-existent. And hey, at the very least these feel like Legends Dinobots. With a lot of the other third-party versions, they scale things up to be Sunbow accurate, but in the process, I feel like they lose what makes Legends so special, basically turning them into small deluxes. And at that point, I personally don't feel much purpose with them. But for these at least, the alts are exactly what I was looking for, and that's enough for me. Transformations mostly do their own things separately from the SS86 versions. Apparently because they have to combine and, having them exactly the same wouldn't really work. You do get some similarities. For example, there's only so many ways you can transform a Swoop, and Snarl very closely resembles his SS86 counterparts. But for the most part, these are their own thing. Guess we'll go in the same order. First thing you want to do with Sloog is remove his tailpiece. Most of them incorporate some form of combination parts forming, and I think it's a pretty cool inclusion. It's very underutilized. You don't see a lot of parts forming where they become parts of the alternate mode. Off the top of my head, G1 Raiden is the only one I can think of. At least the ones I've discussed on this channel. Anywho, you take the legs and separate them from the back, allowing you to bring them all the way down and posing the dino legs however you like. And you separate them and they're quite loose, unfortunately, but what can you do? Bring the arms around into place like so. Take the backpack and you fold these sections up. I actually think this is a better way to do the backpack wings than SS86, but of course it's not accurate, so there's not a lot you can do there. Anyway, then you bring down this section here, which is something the SS86 version didn't have. That's toy accurate. That's how the G1 toy operated, whereas 86 Sloog did not. But otherwise, pretty simple transformation, works quite well aside from the nipples. Then we get to the weirdest of the bunch, Sludge. Because of his combination and because he has to become pants, they really compromised this. And I think some more parts forming, because he doesn't have any, would have made him a lot better. But budget and all that, not much you can do. First thing you want to do is bring the head down. That'll give you a bit more clearance to open up the back section. Separate the legs. Bring these around into place to form said legs. You'll see that they sort of create the illusion of legs like that. Separate the arms, which will allow you to bring them all the way to the back there and rotate the waist around 180 degrees. And last but not least, you bring the dino head down. You gotta do the arms before the Apatosaurus head, otherwise it doesn't really work. And yeah, he looks okay from most angles, but you'll quickly see that they've really made compromises with the legs. But I'll say that mostly for the robot mode discussion. For now, yeah, it's fun enough to transform. Grimlock feels like he's missing something. Like there's something else he needed to do, but there's just missing a step because of the budget. He also feels a lot like his Power and the Primes counterparts, although they were probably designed by different designers. Separate the tailpiece for the combination mode. This doesn't really do as much as I'd like for the combined mode. I wish this did a bit more, but it's still fine. Separate the legs from the back, bring the knees down and separate like so. Fists rotate into place. Do a Grimlock with these bits here and they will fold out like that. But then the backpack actually works a little bit differently, where this section goes all the way down. The combination peg also follows with it, and then these can either stay up like that or they can go down like so. Whichever way you really feel like. Because of the combination element, they had to make some sacrifices, and it's fine. And yeah, I just feel like there should have been another step here or there. It does feel like it's missing something. I don't know what it is missing, but it's just the way it feels. Scar's very much his own thing, mostly because it's not derived from anything else. And he feels a lot more like a G1 combiner, not like they're trying to force Dinobots out of a G1 combiner. Funny how that works. Combiner parts forming piece comes off again. Separate the legs from the back like the rest and do the same as you normally would. These sections rotate down and clip into the sides here. They're like that so that they're cleaner in combined mode. Separate the legs. Bring down the combination peg a little bit of the way and the head a little bit of the way. That'll give you just enough clearance to bring the arms out, and then you can rotate the waist. And then everything else can go the rest of the way with this all the way down, this all the way down, and I guess these up as far as you'd like, so that they stay nice and compact. And yeah, this is definitely one of the more fun ones. It's a lot simpler, but it works. Definitely more Scramble City-esque, even though Dino King and Monstructor weren't Scramble City type combiners. At least I don't think they were. Feel free to correct me in the comments below. Swoop is Swoop. I don't know how to tell you otherwise. Remove the guns from under the wings so that they don't get in the way of anything. Jeez, that one was really tight. Separate the arms from there. Separate the the legs there and bring them there and separate. Bring the wings back so that they sit there. There's nice tabs to keep it all together. Head goes down and combines with this whole gold section. Quite like that step. And other head comes down to follow suit. It's Swoop. It's basically Swoop. I guess it helps that he doesn't have to actually transform much for combine mode, given that he's just standing up. But yeah, no, it works reasonably well. And then we finally get to the one that represents this SS86 the best. And separate from all of that, it also happens to be the most fun conversion. I'm not saying that following the SS86 versions would have made them more fun, but SS86 Snarl is a brilliant conversion, so it makes sense that this would work. Separate the arms from the side and bring them all the way out. Bring the tail on the back like that. They'll separate and open up there. This looks like it actually does stuff, but it doesn't because that's for the combine mode. So instead, you just want to separate that from there. Just bring it down on the ball joints, because then that'll give you enough clearance to open it up. When you start doing that, you can start bringing it all the way out. Bring out the legs, which will allow you to do the 86 trick of bringing in the head on both sides, and then that will allow you to bring everything else out. And he becomes a wonderful Snarl. Is it a secret that he's my favorite of the bunch? They really got better as they went along, and Snarl is just built that way. So yes, pretty simple but pretty effective conversions. They definitely have to be simple given their $20 core class figures, but considering everything they have to do, I think they pull it off reasonably well. Yes, even Sludge, we'll get to him later. But yeah, if you want these as fun desk toys to flip back and forth, they'll do you all right, I suppose. You gotta remember at the end of the day, Legends Combiners, specifically retail Legends Combiners, are going to have compromises. Not third party, not anything crazy, retail Legends Combiners, which these are, and these show off that those compromises can still give a pretty fun experience. When it comes to keeping things within budget, the most difficult hurdle to overcome within the current era is maintaining sprue counts. Unlike, say, model kits where you can really keep adding as many as you like, Transformers need to limit things specifically. I remember people freaking out when Earthrise Cliffjumper first released, and ignoring the main issue I take with the mold, it really opened my eyes to the idea that a figure can seem fairly small and simple, but actually feature a lot of pieces. Meddling with this has allowed some absolutely crazy ideas to come to life, even letting designers take allocated sprues meant for a retail budget and turning them into completely new figures. But while designers have sometimes taken these restrictions and broken free, making amazing figures, there are releases that fall on the flip side. The big issue with this set is that most of the Dinobots are cast entirely in grey, only using paint to differentiate certain pieces. I realize this is reasonably toon accurate, the Dinobots are very grey, but at the same time, casting an entire figure in this kind of shade is not a very good idea. Like, take Slide into the DMs, for instance. In robot mode, this isn't that bad. It's a pretty decent design that's limited in a few areas, but it gets around it with some cool stylization. The head, or rather the face, is adorable, tucked away in there with an itty-bitty scowl. Personally, I prefer the Toy Star face, but I get these are going for toon accuracy, so it makes sense. And hey, it, like most of the rest of the body, channels the vibe of SS86 through the sculpt quite well. The chest is simplified, but still gets everything across reasonably. It's actually pretty cool that they use the existing mouth as a stand-in for the middle, bringing back that toy accuracy in a way not even the 86 version managed to. They even do the wings at the back really well, I'd argue in a better way when compared to the leader. This is also what gets the majority of the paint, with the lack of sprue breakup. No one defeats the Sledge, does it? Okay, when compared to the others at least. It's commendable that it looks this good, given the difficulty of painting red. I really should make something like a graphic that explains the difficulty of red and yellow paint, since apparently I'm obsessed with bringing it up. Not my fault though, as an ex-Warhammer painter, I know this shit is difficult. We'll say, the 5mm nipple placement is a little funny, not awful, just a smidge humorous. The legs are okay, I suppose, they look fine, and the gold on the toes is a lovely touch. Pretty clean application too, but dear god, these are loose. Extremely loose. Like, I don't think I've come across a core class figure this bad, not even Shockwave was this bad for Pete's sake. It really makes the articulation difficult, though not as difficult as the arms. Where are his elbows? Seriously, shouldn't this be standard? Yes, likely because they had to use up the remaining budget for 1, getting the Dinobots to work at the size, and 2, getting the combiner kibble added. He has no elbows. When was the last time we had a figure at this price point without elbows? Maybe without biceps, sure, but I genuinely cannot remember. I find this difficult to reconcile across the whole board. On one hand, it makes absolute sense given the limitations placed on it. I mean, it's a legend scale Dinobot that also has to combine and still somehow maintain a $20 price point. That's a big ask. ask. But by the same token, that's kinda standard for modern Transformers of this size and above. It should be there. Like, we didn't need the waist swivel, it's only really here for the transformation, and prioritizing elbows over that would have made way more sense. Ah well, it's not hateful, at least not for me. I can understand why this would turn people off right off the bat, but I guess I'm able to get over it. Anyway, moving to the aforementioned combination Billy, it's a dinosaur tail. That's really it. It's even less convincing as a weapon than classic Grimlock. But honestly, it's fine. Already the Dinobots are really hard to pull off at a small scale, so building combination pieces into the transformation itself is a really clever workaround. Also, these have their functionality built in, as opposed to just being standalone Dinobots that were jerry-rigged into a Gestalt years after the fact. Sleight of hand is fine as a standalone Dino, but it's clear this is a release that primarily relies on the combination power for the interest. It'll do in a pinch if this is the only one you have, but it's far from the best Legends figure of the Unification era. Still, at least there's something to this standalone guy. It's not like they're focused purely on the combined modes and nothing else. Oh hey, Sludge! Yes indeed, it's the worst Legacy figure ever, according to a good chunk of people. And yeah, I can absolutely see why. The top half starts the illusion of making a decent robot, minus the elbows again, of course. Though this time it makes more sense with how these lock in for stability in combined modes. The head sculpt and chest are sculpted very well, very 86, and it's all the better for it. They even incorporate the combination port quite well, least better than Nipples the Enchilada from earlier. But then you get to the midriff and it just stops. The line between red and grey gives incredible whiplash, and it looks even worse when surrounded by dotted black. Dotted black that chips incredibly easily. But the weirdest thing is easily the legs. They've bundled the thigh conversion into these, but given the complexity of the design and the lack of part-forming pieces, they've had to come up with a really weird compromise. The legs aren't actually attached to the hips themselves. They're all just floating bits, giving the illusion of such. Instead, you've got these massive thigh swivels on the outside, so that when combined, they can properly fit together. Oh, and if that wasn't bad enough, the thigh pods have their hollow sections facing forwards, which is really distracting. On paper, this is a really clever usage, and if you're careful, you can pose this pretty well without making it look too bad, but it's still never going to be as smooth as a normal ball or universal joint. It's always going to feel weird and out of place. I don't hate this. I think the circumstances are a bit weird and stupid to begin with, but the way in which they've tackled those circumstances is quite clever. I do not think this is the worst Legacy figure by far. You've likely already seen my thoughts on that a few months ago at this point. And this just ain't it. It is, however, very dumb. And I do think they should have bit the bullet and used parts forming pieces for this. I have always been a supporter of combiner parts forming. Whenever it's used, it always makes the combined mode infinitely better stability-wise. It can go overboard, sure, but for the most part, it just improves things all around. It even allows the separate robots to be more rounded overall. Huh, funny how that works. And yes, some of you will bring up MMC, but those designs were brought about under very particular circumstances that apparently wore out the designer when he was done with the first three so much that he never wanted to touch a combiner again. Don't quote me on that, it's just stuff I heard that one time I went to TF Nation. This is not a $200 masterpiece figure. It's a standalone Legends release that costs $20. And you can see how things could have been improved. With that said, I don't hate this. I don't love it either, but even from the outset, I never got too angry with it. In fact, with how much people hated it online, I was actually pleasantly surprised, especially with the conversion and Dino mode. On the flip side though, this is not a release you should get on its own. Sure, you can say that about most releases in this set, but more than any others, this is a team player. This is a figure you get to fill out the team and become a pair of pantaloons. Nothing more, nothing less. Once you get that in your head, you'll probably have a much better time. Though, if you want to know what my actual least favorite of the set is, well, look no further than the next release. I mean, just look at him. He's so bloody boring. I don't hate this thing and I wouldn't call it bad by any means, but it's just giving me nothing. The face sculpt is just so wide and squished, which would make sense on any of the others, but for Grimmy, it's like, this is the easiest face to get right? What happened? The torso is flatter than Stanley with no differentiation on the top section because they prioritize the fists instead. Also, the shoulders are way too low, which, sure, he has to combine, but combined with everything else, it just exacerbates the naffness. His midriff is way too thin, and his waist section is non-existent. Legitimately, Sludge looked better proportionally than this. Really, the only part that works okay is the legs, but even then with the way the ball joint is cut, there's no thigh swivel available, functionally making this a bend and nothing else. Combined with the arms not having any elbows and the backpack that never quite looks right in either direction, and he's just, I don't know, so underwhelming. And given his Grimlock, the leader of all things, it's like, why? Why did you do this? Really, the only cool thing is that his combiner bit is blast effect compatible. So despite being pretty stupid, you at least get some fun out of it, provided you have other figures to donate parts from. Functionally, Grimlock is fine, but visually, God, he looks dumb. He's definitely a better standalone figure than Sludge, but I'd sooner mess with Sludge than this. The issues don't ruin the figure overall, but by the same token, there's nothing really to balance it out. Make you care. I just wish this could have been way better. This would have been a great chance for kids to get this character at an affordable scale, because the only other two options on the market at the time were pricier, even pricier, and even pricier still. Fortunately, once we get past the first three, things really start to look up. There's almost a distinct cutoff between the two groups, between which came out when. Predictably, this is when the release schedule fell off, so most casual Aussie collectors never actually got to know the brilliance of the set beyond this. Still, regardless, Scarr hits the scene with a killer design, equal parts unique and Dinobot-y. Well, as unique as you can get while still being loosely based on Gairyu. Interestingly, he has a lot of the same proportional oddities Grimlock had, but as this is an original design, it works with them a lot better. Like, the torso is still a great big pancake, but the design properly works around it, with an almost high-cut jacket effect, with the gold t-shirt underneath. It works in the Dino leg kibble and shoulder joints reasonably well. They don't look as proportionally weird because it's just the way this design is. The higher and beefier shoulders do a lot of that work as well, making this guy feel lovely and top-heavy. The legs are basically all you could want, chunky and formed entirely from the back and dorsal fins, with awesome stilettos peeking out from them, even if they can be a bit messy. Only bit that looks a smidge weird is the feet hanging off the edge. They don't go the other way, so that they're cleaner in combined mode instead. Even the gun is great, although still basically just a fist, it's got a really cool shape to it, and the black paint really helps it stand out. Again, kinda wish it was just cast in black, as this also has chipping issues, but hey, it works quite well. The only part I find a smidge underwhelming is the head sculpt. It's not bad, and it's certainly better than Grimlock's, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel very distinct, especially compared to everything else. Totally get it has to fit in with the other Dinobots, but stuff like this still has to have a vibe of its own. It's painted very well, and it's proportioned pretty decently, but couldn't they have gone a little harder? Still, Scarr remains a wonderful ball of fun. Not quite my favorite of the group, but he was absolutely a pretty good course correction. It seems at this point that they realized how to actually do these properly, and that continues to be evident with the next release. Swoop is often the one folks look at and call the best of the group, and much like with Sludge being designated the worst, while I don't agree, I can see why. He's easily the closest to what a standard Legends figure is, with no real issues or oddities plaguing him. He's the only member of the set not to be missing any articulation steps. Even Snarl doesn't have biceps or thighs, so is the most limber, even keeps the waist swivel. Wonderful. Of course, as mentioned before, Swoop is, of the original 5 Dinobots, the member that resembles his SS-86 counterpart the least, by virtue of the figure not being out at the time. They really took their time getting the leader class one out, and yeah, I think it was worth it. It does mean this version is a bit more rounded though, a bit simpler and classic. He's got his own style, and I think he wears it well. Torso is very simplified, with the head a bit more bulbous than you'd expect. I think it works with the restrictions though, as the alternative would be a fake part, which I don't think anyone wants. The blue on the side might be a little wispy, but it carves out the rest of the torso well and shapes the body nicely. The arms are sculpted decently, and they actually move properly now for once. Not much to say with those though, because the real star of the show is the legs. Long yet chunky, crisp and well defined. Even have a thigh swivel, which means you can make full use of these stompers. I actually quite like the subtle pearlescent look that you get from painting these parts. And even the hollowness from the back isn't too bad, even if it doesn't serve much purpose in Dino mode. Capped off with a wonderful backpack, almost looking like something out of Cyberverse, though not necessarily Cyberverse Swoop, and he becomes quite the looker. Again, the only thing I really take issue with is the face. He's channeling a bit of Kingdom Starscream with how flat and blurry it looks. It's not hateful and it's painted nicely, but it is noticeable. Well, there's also the issue of how the arms can sometimes get stuck on the pegs required for Terry mode, but it's even more minor and ignorable. The amount of times I've actively gotten frustrated with isn't zero, but it's incredibly close to it. Either way, you can see why he's so beloved with how solid he is, more solid than even some regular Legends figures that released in Legacy. Even the weapons are cool as shit. Random fists, sure, but still looking lovely as twin guns with magazines stored below. They could have easily phoned this in, like all of the other Dinobots accessories so far. And beyond that, he just makes the rest feel like they weren't cut from the same cloth, ignoring one final member. Sure, there were issues they had to overcome, but they also made compromises they shouldn't have, let's be fair. Swoop is only one of 2 where it actually feels like they went above and beyond and compromised nothing. The other of the 2 being my favorite member of this set. Out of the original 86 Dinobots, Snarl was easily one of my favorites with just how chunky and clever he was. And I'm pleased to report Core Class Snarl channels that chunky punctured very well, in a way that's almost uncharacteristic of this set. He's one of the few members that just feels like a standard core class, minus the exclusion of rotation at the biceps and thighs. But like, they still bend at least, more than I can say for most of the other members. Head sculpt is on the money, and probably one of the best of the set. Bit washed out on the mouth, like Swoop, but it doesn't come across nearly as bad, especially next to the monolithic tails on the shoulders. Great way to compromise on these, keeping the vibe but having them work differently. You don't even notice the fact they're basically hollow from the front, because unlike Sludge, they're stylized a lot better. Torso is great, using the red and grey separation to create the illusion of something slimmer than it actually is. Sorta wish the other members would have used this method, but oh well. Will say, while the paint is great, not sure why they skipped out on the Autobot symbol. The spot is right there, why miss it? Not like the one on the Dino head is visible in this mode. Waist rotation remains nice and natural due to all the paint they squeezed into this thing. You know, it's interesting all of these were so adamant about including waist swivels. I realize in most instances it's for the sake of the combined modes, but you'd think they could pull back a smidge and maybe focus on the elbows instead. Priorities, people, priorities. Regardless, the feet again do really well with their silver finish over a gold base. Well, mustard, not gold, but it works well enough. And this robot mode works more than well enough. There's really not a damn thing I can criticize outside of missing some rotation in the limbs, but after the rest of the set, I'll take what I can get. And even taking that into consideration, it's a really nice core class figure, one that stands proud with those that came previously. If this was the level of quality the rest had, I don't think I'd be so critical of this set. Also, there's supposed to be a sword, but I lost it. I think I threw it out by accident. Oops. So as far as these go, they started out okay, then got better about halfway through. I suppose that's not unheard of for combiners, modern or classic. They are very jank, don't get me wrong. There's a lot more they could have done and probably should have done, especially in the articulation department. But the limitations very much are in place, so I understand why they did what they did. Question is, were those limitations ultimately worth it? Well, that's going to be a harder question to answer. At the very least, the combination here is a massive step up from the previous Volcanicus. Granted, anything would be a step up from that, but the inclusion of 6 instead of 5 robots, it really does help, even if that inclusion is, again, a backdoor for another combiner. Now, most of these work in either robot mode or either mode. Either one works fine, so I'm just going to have them all in robot mode just so that it's kind of consistent. Starting off with Grimlock, we remove the parts-forming weapon, of course. Bring this section up at the back, we'll deal with that later. Bring the feet together. They will then use their ball joints as a double hinge, and they will move up like that. You use these new hinges that weren't being used before and bring the legs forwards. Collapse everything together, and you'll notice there's a tab there and a slot in there, and it all clips together. Now, the way you're supposed to have this part here is have this all the way forwards and this part out, but I don't like the asymmetry. You can actually bring both of these over and have it sticking out the front like that if you really want to, but I personally just tend to have these on the sides here, just normally like so. Anyway, last but not least, you make sure that the combiner peg and the knee is just up like that, and you're done. Next up, Snarl, who uses parts forming really effectively. You probably wouldn't even know it was parts forming unless you kind of transformed it, but no, that entire backpack piece comes off, and that'll come back later. But anyway, you want to bring these sections forwards, clip the legs together, do the same as Grimlock with the back, although these will actually rotate down a bit. Arms will then do the same as Grimlock, and you'll notice they also peg in the front there. They all peg together, and they peg in the front. And then you bring the parts forming piece back, and that actually forms the front, the shin/foot. I guess it's a foot if it's Volcanicus and a shin if it's Dino King. You get the idea. Then you do the same, you bring up the combiner peg, and you are done. Next up, the weird one. You want to bring the arms up like so. I promise it'll make sense when it combines. Bring these sections around like so. They can't be at a 90-degree angle though, because they need to be far enough out so that these actually fold in, and then there's a tab there and a slot there, and this actually locks together like so. You might think that gets rid of the thigh swivel, but no, the combiner pegs actually act as that later. With that, you can actually just peg in the legs like so, nice and solidly, with the 5mm pegs. Love that they use 5mm pegs, allows you to do all sorts of shenanigans later. Also, completely forgot that Grimlock's piece actually clips on the back of the leg there for storage. Doesn't really do much, it just sits there. With Slugma from Pokemon, you want to remove the gun and separate into 2 separate pieces. We're going to leave the head to the side for now, because this sort of torso piece will peg into the side there. there. Almost kind of cool, but it does look a little bit hollow. Anywho, you want to make sure these are facing outwards so that they're ready to go. Head gets covered up, legs clip together and fold towards the back like so, as if you were in dinosaur mode. Then the arms peg onto the sides there. There's nice tabs that keep it all together. But you want to keep these sections out so it's not completely in dinosaur mode. It's because you got 3 ports there, 3 5mm ports, and 3 5mm pegs there, and a nice hole for the head to go into. You can probably guess why that works the way it does and why we needed to leave the arms out. Because you got another 5mm peg and port, and this will actually collapse together like so. And then for extra solidity, these bits actually plug into the hands there. So you have a lot of pieces on top of them. Also forgot to mention, then you can sort of shift the hind legs back so they're out of the way. Swoop, the guns of course come off. Head goes into Dino mode. Legs go together and rotate 180 degrees. Wings go backwards, although you may have to sort of jam them between the arm there. Port comes out. Hand pieces clip together and plug into there. And that just plugs into the side like that. Finally, we have Scarr. Legs together, arms together, head up, fist there, and that pegs in. You can see even though I'm giving it some force, it's still pegging in rather solidly. And I like doing the head last just for the big reveal, so you then plug Volcanicus's head right there as you would. So yeah, not gonna lie, this is pretty janky. As you'll see further on, it shares more in common with a lot of the Legion combiners we got from decades back than it does with more modern third-party Legends combiners. But it is way better than what they did in Power of the Primes. No doubt after this there will be better unofficial ones. Unofficial ones where I don't forget to put the arms into place on the side there because I'm an idiot. No doubt there will be much better combiners than this, but I still quite like this. It's got issues that we'll get into, but ultimately it's fun building it up. And in this day and age you can't really say that about all combiners on the market, so kudos. Right off the bat, when met with this thing, you quickly realize this combiner shares more in common with the Legion Legends combiners of old than the unofficial ones that the third-party Legends sub-niche delivers. And it sort of makes sense. It's being made using a very different ideology, and given it's been a long time since that ideology was explored, of course many would have forgotten. Hell, I forgot when I first combined this. I was pretty underwhelmed, not realizing it's basically what we should have come to expect. At least one thing was clear right off the bat. It is by far superior to the Power of the Primes rendition, though in fairness that's not very hard. I'm glad they kept the head sculpt and didn't just throw it out and come up with something new. I guess since they farted out that Machinima series a while back, there's now design precedence, so it's accurate to an actual show now instead of just a previous toy. It's arguably even cooler now with extra levels of layering that gives him almost a Viking helmet on the sides. Well, a historically inaccurate Viking helmet. You know the one I'm talking about. The torso that sits below it is quite lovely, very Dino King-esque by virtue of the design, and it's extremely wide thanks to the way everything clips together, but it's also really well detailed. I just wish it had some extra paint. A lot of that grey is punching right in the middle, and it's incredibly gaudy, especially the midriff cut. Cool idea, but without paint it just looks like a piece of mold flash tacked on. Thigh section is okay, I guess. The proportioning is fine, though it doesn't look it with the loincloth being painted in black. Makes it blend in and has the hips appearing higher than they actually are. He does have a midriff, but it doesn't look like he does with the way this works. Still, it's pretty commendable they made this engineering system work as is. I still reckon having a parts-forming waist would have done this whole thing way better, but I also realize that's not possible at this price point. These are all core figures, it just isn't happening. The legs are good. Specifically the legs, there's a reason I'm phrasing it like that. I like how they rearrange the limbs to be very specific greebling on the shin, and they hold together really well. The problem is it just stops. It feels like there should be a foot here, both proportionally and sculpt-wise. And funny thing, there was actually. Aside from there being a slot there, which we know got used later on the Dino King set, Evan Brooks actually mentioned that he tried desperately to get the design in there, only for corporate to say no, at least if memory serves. Could be misremembering, not sure. As annoying as that is, I do understand. They have to keep these members under 20 bucks each. As cool as it would be to SS86 Devastator it and have a higher price point for a couple of the other members, that's just not feasible with this specific project. It's understandable, but it is also still annoying. Arguably though, the most annoying parts are the arms. They're sculpted fine for what they are, very Combiner Wars-esque with the way the parts form. But you know, the sign deal, yada yada. My main problem is this. Inward elbow syndrome. He cannot move his elbows forward without it looking like he's yelling at the clouds. It just makes things a bit wonky, and especially considering he doesn't come with any extra accessories, it's the one thing I feel they should have fixed. It would have been a really easy fix too, just mount the fists forwards. Yes, it would have been more hollow, but there are ways to cover that up. The only thing that's really getting in the way is the robot arms on Scarr, but there's nothing stopping them from re-engineering the thing to have them in a different spot. And we know that they can redo the arms to be better, as seen with the Dino King set later. Yes, Dino King did benefit from the higher budget and a good chunk of hindsight, but much like Zero Mission looking back on Fusion, it just goes to highlight the issues the previous version had. I still don't like Metroid 4, and no amount of vitriol is gonna stop me. Articulation is actually pretty good for the way this set works, minus the inward elbows. I was expecting some issues and limitations in the same vein as DX9 Hulky, but they've actually made sure he's basically got everything the base level requires. A lot of it makes really good use of the 5mm ports that bring everything together. Because of this, if you don't have all of them, you can easily substitute with any form of parts former, long as you have both torso members. But you're bound to, as those were the only two that properly released everywhere in most territories. Volcanicus is good. Not great, but good. He's on the edge of greatness, with a few little things here and there that could properly carry him to the higher levels. But as a combiner, he is fine as long as you can temper your expectations on what he is. Or I've never really messed with a third-party one before. He is not a high-end collectible. He is a fun desk toy coming in at a much cheaper price than most. And as that, yeah, he does reasonably well. Though as someone who's tasted the forbidden fruit, I can't help but wish he did take those extra steps. Like, just place on a few of the upgrades. I'm using the DNA ones, though for the sake of the review, not all of them. I know a lot of people whinge about DNA including way too much random bullshit, but there's always someone who wants something out of each set, and I very much prefer them to the fragile 3D printed alternatives. But like, you don't need that much. The added feet make these legs actually feel complete now. The pelvis makes the torso seem properly proportioned, and although they've gone a bit overboard with the arms, they look so much better now that you can pose them properly. I'm not saying these figures could have done this right off the bat, but some form of Hasbro budgeted equivalent could have been achieved, like painting the waist differently or orienting the fists the other way. It doesn't take much to bring this guy from a solid 3 out of 5 to a soaring 4. But this review isn't about the DNA design kit, it's about the original, and what we have is compromised. Really, the only modes that actually pull everything off properly are the dinos. Although lacking in articulation, they do really well. The robots heavily compromise themselves for the combine mode, and the combine mode somewhat compromises itself for everything else. It's echoing elements of Earthrise Double Dealer with how there's cascading concessions, though nowhere near as bad. And I think there's one key dichotomy that makes this figure what it is ultimately. This figure shouldn't exist in this format, but ultimately it has to exist. The Dinobots are difficult designs to get right. They're rounded, kibbly, and have to convert into relatively blocky robots. Doing them at a lowered price bracket is a nightmarish process. There's more than just size behind the reasoning of SS86. Legend scale Dinobots are even more difficult, and as such, they're not really things that lend themselves to core class. But well, corporate knows kids want dinosaurs. They know kids are going to want a cheap and affordable set of prehistoric lizards. And since the only other set is, well, $500, of course they were going to commission a set like this. So okay, sure, compromised and difficult, but not impossible. But then there's the question, should the Dinobots even combine in the first place? Since G1, fans have wondered if the Dinobots were ever the long-lost combiner team. All the other teams combined, why shouldn't they? Well, ignoring the fact that never intended for such, making the point moot, combiners often have very simplified designs to facilitate essentially triple changing engineering. They're blockier, and the vehicles are often chosen to have specific proportioning. The Dinobots are not that. They're rounded, complicated, with a bunch of random bits thrown all over the place. I'm not saying the Dinobots cannot combine, I'm just saying it takes a lot of extra effort and modifications to make them combine. Modifications out of the realm of core class. There's 2 layers of dissonance above Volcanicus. The fact that he's even working this well as is honestly a miracle, but by the same token, he had to exist. Volcanicus should not have been a combiner in the core class scale, especially the first that they did. A Devastator or a Predaking would have been much better candidates. Simpler designs that would have worked better for the size. But that never could have happened. Corporates needed smaller Dinobots, and they needed them to combine to market to casual fans. And they needed to combine in a specific method as a backdoor for Dino King later down the line, though that last one seems a more designer input thingo. This figure is performing an eternal balancing act atop layers and layers of compromise, and in some areas, it really shows. And with all that said, with everything working against this release, I think it's a miracle it turned out this good. It's compromised, sure, but it works in so many areas. Sure, there are issues. There are a ton of issues, but it's good. It's a decent combiner. That's honestly crazy to say with everything working against this. They work as desk toys, and it still works decently as a display piece in combined mode. Though, if you're going in on these, I strongly advise getting some form of hand and fist upgrade. Doesn't have to be the DNA kit. I know a bunch of people hate that company, and there are others you can choose from. Just pick something. But even so, there are far worse Dinobot combiners on the market, Hasbro and otherwise. This is a contradiction of a figure. It shouldn't exist, but it had to. It shouldn't work, but it somehow does, even with its issues. Upgrades or no, it is most definitely worth the price. And ultimately, I don't regret going in on all of these. Not that I would have skipped these anyway, because oh dear god, I am obsessed with legends. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on the idea of Dinobots combining below. Do you think something like this is a good idea, or are you still a purist on them remaining separate? Are you happy with Volcanicus here, or would you have preferred they focused on a different combiner? Sorry for taking so long to release a new video after the monstrosity I just finished. I was hoping to have just a little break then get back to things, but I haven't really been afforded such, as one of my colleagues from work got sick, and then I couldn't even film anything new myself because there's kind of this leak in the ceiling above where my light box would usually go, so I had to move my entire thing out of there before the mold made me transphobic. This video was initially meant for the Legendary Marathon, but I've just kind of moved it closer. I guess I'll figure out what to do later. Hoping that leak can be fixed soon because I really have some other things I need to work on. But until then, as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time!